everyone for joining us today on another episode of our EarthWise Pet Wellness podcast. Today, I am super excited to have Daniel Schulof on the call. So, Daniel, can you kind of give our listeners a little bit of background, what you do, and then we're going to dive headfirst into DCM. That is what today is all about. DCM. It's been a long several years, a really long journey for most of us. But you're going to shed some really interesting light and perspective on the whole DCM matter. So go ahead and introduce yourself and let's talk DCM.
Certainly. One of my favorite subjects. Thanks for having me. I guess what your listeners should know about me are a few things. One, I've been doing dog food stuff since something like 2012. In 2016, I published a book that's called Dogs, Dog Food, and Dogma. And it's about my attempt to understand why so many dogs and cats in the United States and the Western world are overweight. Why so many, this weird condition that you'd think we'd be able to control, no problem. That's absolutely horrible for these animals, but it's still happening at epidemic levels. It made no sense to me. And so I spent 4 years trying to understand that question. I was like working as a lawyer once upon a time, and I got my own dog. I became interested in this subject, and I got so obsessed with it that I eventually quit my job to just write this book full time. And in 2016, it came out. It kind of makes the case that carbohydrate is the root of the problem. That's my perspective on the science, that like, were it not for dietary carbohydrate being the backbone of the modern pet food ecosystem, we would not have obesity as a major problem among dogs and cats, that you essentially can't make a dog or a cat overweight or obese unless you feed it carbohydrate. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to make it happen.
Yeah.
After I published the book, I made a company that's designed for people who agree with that thinking, who are in that camp. Either you read my book and you were persuaded by it, or you, like millions of people, came to that logic on your own, because it's certainly a subject that gets a lot of attention in the human nutrition community too. We're called KetoNatural Pet Foods. We make kibble, very low carbohydrate content, the lowest carbohydrate content of any kibble currently being sold in the US. That's kind of the main thing that we do. In 2018, when, as you mentioned, the DCM scandal broke, we had been selling dog food for a few years, couple of years. And I was really surprised to learn that the FDA had announced that it was investigating whether, in essence, grain-free dog foods were causing dogs to develop this deadly heart disease called dilated cardiomyopathy, or DCM. I had written this, like, the nature of my book is like a lot of scientific research, right? Like a lot of just diving into studies. What do they actually say? What don't they say? But also a kind of like, science journalism that's more tied to understanding how the papers got written. Who wrote this? What is that person's history? What is that person's conflicts of interest? How is the study used, et cetera, et cetera. And so, like, I had spent a lot of time in this domain at the time the DCM scandal broke. And I recognized things about the way that it was all being framed up. I recognized some of the names that were involved, some of the veterinarians that were alleged, that the FDA said were helping it understand whether this was a real thing or not, that grain-free diets were causing this disease. And so, and frankly, and I'd written about these people, and like, I didn't write about the stuff I wrote about them, the stuff I had learned about them long before DCM wasn't great from my perspective. It was like, these are people that had done things in some instances that I thought were unfair, that I thought were false, that I thought were motivated by their financial connections to corporate interests, as opposed to just good faith efforts to help pet owners. And so for all those reasons, I was pretty like skeptical and suspicious that there was really something there when the FDA announced it was looking at grain-free diets and DCM. And because I was running a company that, though we were never, the main, like our main nutritional philosophy is, as I described it before, we think carbs are bad. We try to give you options for feeding your dog with as little carbs as possible. Whether those carbs come from grains or not is not really something that I think is all that important. So it's never been central to our brand to be like, we are grain free. That said, they happen not to contain grains. It's not something I like highlight very much, but for people who do believe that that's a big thing for their dogs, well, okay, we'll make our diets grain-free as well. And so when the FDA said we're looking at whether grain-free diets are giving dogs this deadly heart disease, it was something that was bad for our company too. So I was like in this place where like I recognize some things. I was being hurt by the notion that there was something there, the grain-free diets were causing this disease. And collectively, for those two reasons, I got very motivated to try to kind of get to the bottom of everything that had been going on that had provoked the FDA to launch this investigation. And I've sort of had my like teeth sunk into it ever since, and I've done a whole cluster of different things that give me some unique perspective on the validity of the issue and the FDA's investigation.
I love it. I mean, seriously, what better two worlds to combine to really have someone with the expertise and ability to attack this? And I know from the majority of our stores, for sure, and probably also the majority of our customers and listeners today, we're all in a similar camp of what is the truth here? What is the truth, and why has it been so confusing for all of us all of these years? Why don't we know anything at this point?
Yeah, I fully endorse that perspective. It is definitely the case that we have customers who I hear from on a, daily basis today, 2024, 6 years after the FDA announced its investigation, who are still confused about this subject, hearing information and recommendations about this subject that are patently false, that are clearly, some either misunderstanding or deliberately misleading. And so, yeah, it's a live issue for everyday pet owners on a regular basis. And so, yeah, it is something that I think, when I say it's something I really like talking about, that's part of why I say that is like, I believe in my experience, I've seen that it is a difficult place to like it's a difficult time to be a pet owner that wants to make good, conscientious, thoughtful, evidence-based decisions for your pets. Because
Evidence-based keyword.
yeah, yeah, it's just a world in which you are very likely, here's the thing that is almost universal in my experience. You're not only going to get different recommendations and information from your vet as opposed to your most trusted source of like buying pet food, like the folks who run the store that whether it's Earthwise or somewhere else where you buy you're not just likely to get like different information and different recommendations from those two folks. You're likely to get opposite information from them. And that is a very difficult place to be. If you are, among the 99% of pet owners who are like, I'm going to make my decision process is not going to be that I'm going to learn everything there is to know about the relevant evidence. I'm going to defer to experts.
Mhm.
It makes it incredibly difficult to make good decisions when you have two different groups of folks you trust on some level in both cases who are telling you the exact opposite. And so it's just one particularly glaring like manifestation of how it's just a mess. It's so difficult to be a well-informed pet owner. And so the DCM scandal is, I think, a really nice vehicle. Understanding what has taken place with regard to DCM helps people to understand the broader problem at play, which is like, in essence, that the industry plays too large a role in my judgment, at least, too large a role in shaping what individual pet owners believe about the science of nutritional stuff for companion animals. And so by talking about DCM, you can help people understand that broader thing to a better degree and make better decisions about other issues for their dog or cat going forward.
Well, can you explain that to us, what you mean by the industry playing too large of a role in this?
Yeah, sure. So in like functioning scientific communities. Like there are, the institution of science is very logically divided out into different fields. There are some people who are um, astronomers. There are some people who are chemists, and they focus on different parts of the natural world and how the institution of science can be used to improve our understanding of it. And when the folks who make up one of those discrete disciplines or communities are all doing the right thing, they're all working in good faith towards improving the world's understanding of their little corner of the natural world, it's a beautiful institution. It's the best tool that mankind has ever devised for understanding the truth about the world around us. Um, but it's also doesn't have to work that way. It is possible to corrupt and kind of co-opt the auspices of professional science. And when that takes place, you can have communities that are not only like doing a poor job of unearthing the truth, but that are dysfunctional, that are actively producing bad information that is not helping us understand the real world better, but instead misinforming us about stuff. Um, and in my judgment, the companion animal nutrition community is as bad. I'm not a historian of science that knows everything there is about Marie Curie and every other scientist who's ever lived. But as far as I am aware, it's as bad a discipline as there presently exists, which is to say, there are more conflicts of interest and other kinds of corrupting influences in companion animal nutritional science than any other industry of which I'm aware. Like if you want to practice, the reason I make that kind of strong overarching claim and feel confident about saying it is like this example helps understand where I'm coming from, helps you understand where I'm coming from. If you want to do this kind of work for a living, you're going to be a scientist. You love animals and you're into nutrition, and you're going to set out on your career to be a companion animal nutritional scientist. You're going to be one of these people that helps the public understand better how the nutritional world works for their dogs and their cats. You cannot, in the modern era, do that job unless one of two things has taken place. Number one, if you are independently wealthy, such that your job is not going to be your source of paying the bills, you can do that job and do it in good faith and follow the evidence wherever it goes, follow your instincts where they go, run down theories that you think are promising, etc. On the other hand, if you're not independently wealthy, if you, like most of us, your job is what pays the bills for you, then you are taking money from industry in order to do this job. There is no, in many scientific disciplines, there are sources of funding for the work that has to be done that come from public places. Like you don't have to be sponsored by SpaceX in order to be a professional astronomer in the United States today. You can't do that. Is not the case when it comes to companion animal nutritional science. I'm not making claims about which specific pet food companies pay for which specific researchers, but the way that research gets funded in the United States is it comes from corporate sources. There's not enough money going around unless you're taking money from pet food companies to do the work. The rest of it's just not there. There's not the equivalent of the National Institutes of Health for doggy and kitty science. And so you're taking money from industry. And that quality makes it an inherently a really compromised community. You have, because there are plenty of times, right, where the findings, the truth, might be at odds with one or more of your corporate benefactors, what's good for them. And when that happens, all of a sudden there major problems start to develop. Are we going to continue doing this work on this company's dime, even though what we're finding out is bad for that company? It's like a recipe for disaster. And it unfortunately is the world in which we live when it comes to companion animal nutrition in the early 21st century.
Wow. I mean, I think the average person can understand what you're saying, which is that research in companion animal nutrition is largely, if not solely, being funded by pet food manufacturers within the industry, right? That's in essence what you're saying.
Yep, that's correct.
So you're saying also this applies to any and all research that was done on DCM potentially having any association to a specific type of diet, right? So
Yeah,
can you shed light on, more
that's
specifics on that?
sure. That's 100% the case. It's like it is not the case that the evidentiary, the scientific record around dilated cardiomyopathy, it's not the case that it's like uniform. It's more accurate to say there's kind of like camps with regard to DCM. There's a group of folks whose findings have kind of been very consistent with one another that sort of make up what you might call like the pro like folks who are main proponents of the idea that grain-free diets are doing something with regard to DCM. And then there are folks in another camp who are very skeptical of that. And they're carrying out their own studies that sort of tend to run together as well. They kind of make up a cohesive body that sort of reflects their worldview on things. In both of those cases, there's industry funding that is like that is turning the gears of that stuff. It's just different companies paying folks on the two different sides. And so, yes, it is very much a subject where corporate interests have played a leading role in shaping what the public understands about it. The focus of my work, as is reflected in my earlier like description of how I kind of came to this issue and why it's interesting and motivating for me, has been on trying to understand and explain and tease out the financial conflicts of interest posed by, like, inflicted upon the folks who are proponents of the idea that grain-free diets and DCM are running together in some kind of way. That there is, if you want to avoid DCM, you ought to stay away from one of those products. I know that little tiny corner of the pet food world, which is a little tiny corner of the much broader scientific community, very well. I know it as well as anybody, and I've done a bunch of stuff that has given me that knowledge, and that I've used ways in which I've used that knowledge, and that's my my like tiny little contribution to the world of companion animal science.
Well, I wouldn't say it's tiny, but please do elaborate on what that contribution is. You've
Sure.
done something very major, very big, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I've done a few things. I've like my as I explained before, I was skeptical that there was any there at the beginning for the reasons I highlighted. And I today, 6.5 years later, continue to be. I'm not like I haven't come upon stuff where I'm like, oh, looks like I was probably wrong about this. There was kind of changed my perspective in a big thematic way. I'm still very much, I would say that as I've done like factual investigation and other kinds of work related to this, I've become more convinced in my perspective as opposed to the opposite. And the stuff that I've done has generally been about bringing to light more of the information underpinning the notion that DCM is a thing tied to grain-free diets. So a few things particularly that I've done. One is I filed a lawsuit against the Food and Drug Administration, trying to get them to give me all of their records about DCM. There's like a law in the United States that says, in essence, unless some kind of exception applies, if you ask your government for its records, they got to give them to you. And there are lots of exceptions. There are all kinds of things that are, security concerns that you can't just. But unless something falls into one of those buckets, government kind of has to give it to you. In an effort to try to understand what brought about the DCM investigation, I went out and asked the FDA under those kinds of laws to give me its documents. They said, no, we're not going to do it. I sued them and I won. And court basically said, look, FDA, you got to give this guy everything you got on DCM. And so for a period of like 3 years, I would just every 6 weeks get a new CD in the mail from the federal government that would contain hundreds and hundreds of documents, redacted, blanked out in ways that protected private information or whatever, but that collectively composed the DCM investigation file. And it's like 20,000 pages of records, and it's got all kinds of things in there, from emails to internal files to like presentations that the FDA made, like how those presentations came to be, all that kind of thing. And when I got those documents, it became clear to me that there were really important and really eye-opening facts that were revealed by the documents that were not previously publicly reported. And they were really important to understanding what took place and what has, kind of everything that's happened as a result of the DCM scandal. More particularly, they showed what I believe to be fraud. They show that there are folks who deliberately misled the FDA into thinking that there was more involving DCM and grain-free diets than the evidence really showed. In essence, and this is like an attempt to distill a pretty complicated body of information down into something very simple. What took place is two veterinarians with ties to a big pet food industry company intentionally cherry-picked cases involving grain-free diets, dogs that got DCM while eating grain-free diets, and reported those to the FDA while causing the FDA to mistakenly believe that they weren't getting cherry-picked cases. They were getting instead all the cases of DCM. When the FDA announced its investigation, what did the logic, the justification for it went something like this. They said, in essence, to the public, look, DCM's been around for a long time. It's a disease that dogs have gotten for a long time. But in the lead up to the summer of 2018, when the investigation began, we, the FDA, got a spike in DCM cases, and they all seem to involve grain-free diets. Therefore, it's leading us to launch an investigation into that, which feels very reasonable and logical. It feels like exactly what you want your public health agency to do, right? Like if all of a sudden the FDA was getting a bunch of case reports involving my products and COVID, tons and tons of case reports involving dogs eating Dan's dog food that are getting COVID, that looks scary. The FDA might not have anything, but it's enough to prompt it to start to take a closer look. And that's what the FDA told the public took place with regard to grain-free diets and DCM. And so if you're the public, you feel like, all right, this makes total sense. Of course they should be doing that.
Yep.
When I got the documents, what became clear is that isn't what happened. It's not that a discrete or like an unaffiliated group of pet owners from around the country were all sending in cases involving DCM and grain-free diets to the FDA at the same time. If that had taken place, it would make perfect sense for the FDA to launch an investigation. But when I got the documents and I could see where the cases actually came from, that wasn't what took place. What took place is more than 80% of the cases of DCM that were reported to the FDA in the lead up to its investigation came from two people. They're two different veterinarians that are professors at two different veterinary schools. One is a woman whose name is Lisa Freeman. She's a professor at Tufts University near Boston. And the other is named Darcy Aiden. She's a professor now at the University of Florida. She changed. She was at NC State at the beginning of this matter and is now at the University of Florida. But those two ladies themselves are the ones who submitted more than 80% of the cases that the FDA is basing its. Okay, that's not public information. That's pretty interesting. But it's not fraud. That's not evidence that some kind of fraud took place. That's just like maybe these two ladies were on the bleeding edge of this issue and they saw the pattern before anybody else and they were the good Samaritans. But there's something else that the documents show, and that collective with the fact that it just came from these two ladies is what really punches, which is that these folks admitted that they weren't just sending the FDA all the cases of DCM that they encountered. What they were doing looked like this. These are practicing veterinarians. They teach nutrition, but they also, care for animals. If a dog came into the Lisa Freeman's clinic with DCM, they have a protocol, and this is like one of the documents that I got in the case. They had a protocol that they would use. And the very first step of the protocol was dog comes in with DCM. First thing we're going to do is we're going to ask the pet owner, did this animal eat a grain-free or there are other terms that they use to describe this broad category, but for purposes of conversation, we'll say grain-free diet or not. And if the dog was eating a grain-free diet, then the very first thing that they did is they put together a case report and sent it off to the FDA. If, on the other hand, the dog was eating a diet being produced by one of these companies that doesn't make grain-free diets, but that happen to be paying this woman as well, they would not send that to the FDA. And so what the FDA got from these two ladies was a really misleading sense of what percentage of the dogs with DCM were eating these diets, which of course looks very scary if you're not aware of it. That amounts to fraud. In my judgment, you're misleading the FDA intentionally. And so, by the summer of 2022, I had all that evidence kind of worked out and well understood and documented. And the issue at that point became, well, what are you going to do with this? Like, okay, public has a significant misunderstanding about this stuff that's not really public information. What do you do? Well, one of the things that I thought made a lot of sense, and I continue to think makes a lot of sense, is that this evidence could form the basis for a big civil lawsuit. So our court system, at the risk of getting into the probably most, if dog food's not the most boring subject, then probably like practice of law is. So I'm sure we have tons and tons of folks just waiting for what I'm about to say. But like the legal system in the US has two buckets: criminal law and what's called civil law. Criminal law, as we all know, is there's some behavior you're not allowed to engage in. And if you engage in it, then the government gets to bring you to court and charge you with committing a crime, and they try to prove that it took place. If it took place, they convict you of the crime, then they can put penalties on you. They can make you go to jail or whatever. Civil court system, civil legal system is not like that. It's about two different parties, two private parties, typically, suing each other for money or some other kind of relief from the court. One party goes into court and says, I've been harmed or I'm getting harmed by something that somebody else did to me. The court needs to endorse that and rectify the situation by giving me some of my money back for the amount that I've been harmed. In the case of the DCM controversy, there have been big groups of folks who have all been harmed pretty badly by the fraud that I highlighted before, the misinformation.
Yeah.
One of them, of course, tons of pet owners made different decisions than they would have made about what to feed their dog because they learned bad information about DCM. You and I have never talked specifically about this, but I can only imagine, given the nature of the products that EarthWise carries, EarthWise and stores like it got harmed as people who came to believe that grain-free diets were a DCM risk stopped buying those products.
Yes.
But in my judgment, the group that got harmed most directly are the folks who are making the diets. Like, in essence, there's a lot of folks came to believe that eating these products was equivalent to poisoning your dog. And this is not good for the companies that make those products. And they all got damaged really significantly. And so I thought you could put together a civil lawsuit where you essentially say to the court, look, collectively, our whole group of companies has been damaged so much by the misconduct that caused people to believe that grain-free diets cause DCM, that the court should require the parties that made that happen give us our money back. So I put together this big, what's called a class action lawsuit. That's probably a term maybe the folks know already. That's like, sometimes the court will let a whole group of similarly situated people sue as one. You can, if, for instance, a telephone company, I won't use anybody's specific name, telephone company starts charging a fee to people that, like me, that are bald. All the bald people in America could get together and file a class action lawsuit and say those fees are inappropriate, and the court should essentially hear that case all in one place for efficiency reasons. You could, I believe, and acted upon, do something similar with regard to the companies that have been damaged by misinformation regarding DCM. You could put together a lawsuit that says, in essence, the bad guy, the folks who intentionally misled the FDA and otherwise promulgated the idea that grain-free diets are causing this disease, you could file a lawsuit and say, hey, look, we're the guys that have been all hurt by this. We think the folks who brought this about should have to pay us back for all the hurt they've caused us. And
Hmm.
so, in essence, that's what I did. And in the spring of this year, in February of 2024, uh, lawyers representing me, or my company, from a big firm in Manhattan filed a huge class action lawsuit involving DCM. Um,
Wow.
yeah. And that's sort of like the main thing, the way that I put it to use. I've done a fair amount of public education stuff about the evidence that I've compiled over the years, but this is sort of another discrete kind of task, kind of discrete project that's sort of notable. We filed a lawsuit against a cluster of individuals and entities that all played a role in the misconduct. So the parties that were defendants, there are five individuals, five vets, who all is the two vets that I described before, and three others who played different role, who are professors at different institutions, did other things pertaining to DCM, along with three organizations. The first of which is a big pet food company, Hill's Pet Nutrition. They're one of the oldest and largest pet food companies in the United States. They're owned by the big multinational food company Colgate-Palmolive. And they're notable as being like they're the number one maker of what are called therapeutic diets. So they are the brand of veterinarians. Their products are sold through veterinary offices, and a big part of their sales and operations strategy and brand is we're the brand of veterinarians. I think they call themselves the number one brand of veterinarians. Um, that company, it became clear, had been paying the folks who, the five veterinarians that I highlighted before, who actively did the misleading of the FDA and putting out false information in other domains about DCM. So Hills is a defendant in the lawsuit as well. And then two other organizations that are tied to Hills, nonprofit organizations that were created by the same folks who created Hills Pet Nutrition and were used to kind of further this conspiracy, either by having money flow through them or by amplifying the message that
Mhm.
and so, yeah, we filed a big, what amounts to a false advertising class action lawsuit against Hills and its co-conspirators around DCM.
Amazing. You said that you filed that lawsuit in spring of this year. So, has there been any rulings on the case? Any updates that you can tell our
Yes.
listeners?
Yes. So yes, there has, and it's been pretty recent to before. It's just like kind of a few weeks before you and I sat down for this talk. We had a relatively major ruling. It's early. The one thing that is very difficult about the U.S. legal system is that it moves very slowly, and so as it seems like, oh well, we've had almost a year pass since we filed this lawsuit. I'm sure tons of things have happened. No, not really. Really, there's been one kind of ruling so far, and it just came down a couple weeks ago. And unfortunately, from my perspective, it's bad for us. In
Oh,
essence, yeah. I mean, look, I'll explain. It's not a final thing yet, and I'll give you the relevant context around it, but it's not what I was hoping for. Let's put it that way. Um, as I said before, our lawsuit is a false advertising lawsuit. The way that the civil, I'm going to see if I can explain this using an analogy that I haven't like thought all the way through. So let's cross our fingers and hope that this lands. But, like in the civil court system in the United States, for you to bring a case against somebody else and say, court, these guys owe us money or something else, you have to squeeze your allegations into one or several what are called causes of action. And those are like the vehicles by which the court determines whether somebody owes somebody else money under the law or not. So an example would be assault. It's a cause of action, it's a civil cause of action in the United States for assault. If you hit somebody without their consent and you cause some kind of damage to them, that person can sue you for assault. That's the cause of action that they're going to try to prove the elements of. And if they can prove the elements of, then The court says you win and you get your money. So in our case, one of the things that's like difficult about establishing civil liability for the misconduct that was involved here is like, what specific cause of action gives rise to a theory? Okay, well, we know these guys did X, Y, and Z misleading, false, bad things. What kind of civil case could we actually bring against them? And as we thought through it, the one that makes the most sense is a false advertising case. There's a federal statute, excuse me, that it says in essence, you can't publish false advertising about your competitors if you're doing business in the United States. EarthWise can't go out there and say, well, Dan's pet food stores all support, I don't know, communist China. You're not allowed to put false information into your advertising. And the DCM scandal seems to map pretty nicely onto that, in my judgment. The folks who were putting out misinformation were either Hills itself or folks who were deliberately working on Hills's behalf in connection with Hills. The information was good for Hills, was bad for all these folks that Hills was competing with. And it was false. There's the core, that like factually false statement that's at the core of the case is something that Hills and the other co-conspirators went around and said dozens and dozens of times in all sorts of different domains. They said there appears to be an association or a correlation between grain-free, or what they would call BEG diets, boutique exotic ingredient or grain-free diets, and DCM, that those two variables are correlated. Not necessarily that we're going to say that DCM is caused by these diets, but that they are associated, that there's some kind of statistical overlap there. That's actually not true. That's false. There is no science, either from the FDA or in any of the studies that what I call the bad guys have put out since the FDA announced its investigation, that reach the conclusion that those two variables are associated or correlated.
Right.
Therefore, saying otherwise is false. And because they said it in domains that were essentially promoting Hills, it's false advertising. Therefore, it's a false advertising suit.
Got it.
In bringing this case, what felt always like a slam dunk is that, if you think about it, false advertising, kind of two main parts, right? There's the false part and the advertising part. False part is a slam dunk. That's what I just described. There really is no evidence of this thing that they keep saying. The advertising part, tougher, right? Because this was like a pretty well conducted operation here. The folks, the defendants in the suit, didn't just put out television commercials that say there's an association between grain-free diets and DCM, go feed Hills instead. That would too clearly represent advertising and false advertising and give rise to liability. So instead, they used other vehicles to disseminate that message. There's stuff that appeared in scientific journals that wasn't peer reviewed, but still reached the same type of readership that those journals tend to reach. There's stuff, comments made to major media when the FDA announced its DCM investigation. New York Times, the Washington Post, folks like that covered it. And the folks who are defendants to the lawsuit gave statements that were published in those articles, false statements. And cluster of other things, misleading the FDA itself, statements being made to the FDA. The core of the case that felt like the battleground when we filed it is that advertising or not? And that's it's fair to say, is not a slam dunk one way or the other. The court, when there's false advertising cases have been around for long enough that courts have confronted fringe examples and instances dozens and dozens of times over the years, and they've worked out a framework that they use to evaluate whether or not something constitutes advertising for purposes of this. It gives the court a lot of discretion in making that judgment. It's a factual kind of inquiry where you're saying, what's the purpose of this statement? how many people heard this statement, things like that. And then the court works out whether, okay, does this count as advertising or not? For us, it was always like, that's going to be the issue. Is the court really going to think that what took place here is advertising or not, regardless of like the falsity and the damaging nature of what's taken place? Is it going to be advertising or not? What we never really thought is that the court would somehow come to the conclusion that the false statements actually weren't false at all. But 2 weeks ago, that's exactly what did take place. We were very, very surprised and very disappointed to learn that the court ruled that, among other things, the statements at issue in this case were not, in its eyes, literally false. In essence, what the court said is that regardless of whether it's advertising, and they address advertising in a separate way, regardless of whether it's advertising, it's not literally false to say that there's an association between grain-free BEG diets and DCM. And as a result, the court said, you guys don't have a case. That's not literally false. You don't have a case. And if we were to just simply take that ruling to heart and not do anything about it, it would just bring an end to the lawsuit really before it got going in any significant part. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on in a lawsuit. You gather evidence and you take people's interview under oath. None of that would even happen. The court would just have the case go away. Maybe I'll pause there, give you a chance, like probe any part of that so far before I kind of get into the reasoning that the court used and what we've done about it and why. But I know I've said a lot of like legal stuff there, so maybe I'll just kind of pause it for a minute.
No, that's fine. I actually really need to take a drink of water.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so you're wanting me to.
I don't know. I've just been like riffing for so long that like.
No, I mean it's all good stuff. I've been.
Yeah, if it is, like, you just tell me if there's anything you want me to hit further so far, or if you have questions about it, or something doesn't sound clear, or whatever. I'm happy to.
No, okay, so. And I already just forgot where you ended off just before you.
Oh, I basically said like we got this ruling from the court where they said that it's not literally false to say that there is there's an association between these two things.
Okay. So we need to introduce the idea that that is a flaw in scientific reasoning. So let me see how I can pull that back in. Okay, so what you're describing sounds like that can't be the case, right? You said you had a slam dunk that the false part of the false advertising is clear. It's indicated in all of those 20,000 page documents that you sifted through over 3 years plus. It's everywhere, right? That was the part that we shouldn't have gotten this case dismissed from, right?
Yeah.
What is going on there? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
The way that I would understand that.
Yeah, it was hugely surprising. Like, to give you a sense of like how surprising, I thought we would be able, and I still think this will happen. It's just going to now take longer. We would be able to get the court to rule very early on that that's not even an issue in dispute here, that there's just no evidence on one side of this argument. Therefore, it shouldn't be part of the fight of what we're going on. That should just be established by the court that there really is no evidence of this association. The court said, in essence, the exact opposite. And it was, of course, very surprising, very disappointing, right? Because the court's ruling is, in essence, your lawsuit needs to go away now. And really discouraging in a different sense. And the way in which it was discouraging is like it revealed a kind of failure to understand some basics of scientific reasoning that you want, of course, the judge managing your lawsuit to have, but you also want it more generally in folks that you trust, the kind of folks who have graduate degrees, who we trust with making decisions about stuff where evidence is relevant. You want to make sure, like, if they don't grasp some of these fundamental things, you end up with bad stuff. And it's part of, I believe, it's a little like outside the scope of the lawsuit, but like I believe part of the reason the DCM controversy has had such legs and it's stuck around for so long, despite the fact that there's no evidence of this association, is because of a kind of similar lack of scientific literacy amongst plenty of folks in the veterinary world. And it brings me no great degree of pleasure to say that. But the reality is that it's really straightforward, I think, to say there's just no study that has reached the key conclusion that these folks keep saying. You would expect the folks that are, literally holding doctorates in these domains to be able to understand that as well, and a lot didn't. And so to see the court make, in essence, the same mistake was very discouraging in its own right. So I'll see if I can explain the nature of the mistake. But I'm sure you'll link to the lawsuit. Like anytime you have a big federal lawsuit in the United States, it's all public information, and folks can read through the writing on this directly. And it's not as, this isn't 50 Shades of Gray, but it's also not like the driest, most unreadable stuff you've ever read. If you read it, you'll get a better understanding than I'm able to just like kind of explain right here. But in essence, what the court endorsed is the belief that it can't be literally false to say there is an association unless you have proof that there is no association. That's sort of, it's a lot. That's, I see for folks that are listening audibly or just the audio side, Erika was kind of like making a thoughtful look and shaking her head a little bit. And that's the thing is like, okay, wait, let me catch up to what you said there. It's like you have to focus on it. It's in order to sift through the specifics of it. So let me say it again. Essentially, what the court ruled is that it's not literally false to say there is an association unless there is proof that there is no association. Okay? It is, otherwise it's not literally false.
Okay, make it make sense, because that doesn't make sense. That is the opposite of my understanding of scientific reasoning.
Right, exactly. And so essentially what the court was saying is that, look, how do we know that at some point, like in order for us to bless the idea that this is false, we have to feel certain that there's no evidence that's out there somewhere that's going to show. It's difficult to describe, but
Yeah.
like there's a difference between an absence of evidence of something that's like nobody's ever seen a Bigfoot, and then the evidence of absence. How would you prove that Bigfoot does not exist? What is the thing that you could put out there that would make it that nobody else would ever run a Bigfoot show, ever again? If that kind of thing was possible, if it existed, it would be out there by now. We would know at this point that you could just adduce this kind of evidence to show that Bigfoot does not exist. We have affirmative evidence he doesn't exist, and we would have no more Sasquatch shows. But that's not a thing that conceptually exists anywhere. You can't do that. You can have millions and millions of people who have said, I've gone looking, I've never seen a Bigfoot. There's no evidence that Bigfoot does exist, but it's not possible. It's not conceptually possible to adduce evidence that Bigfoot does not exist.
Right.
It's a logical fallacy that's been around in scientific reasoning for so long that it's got its own Wikipedia page. And it's what's typically called is the Russell's teapot fallacy. And it's named after this guy who's one of the world's great all-time philosophers, a British guy named Bertrand Russell. And instead of talking about the existence of Bigfoot, this is before Bigfoot, I guess, was popular, Russell framed it up as a teapot floating out in space somewhere beyond the atmosphere. And so it's called the Russell's teapot fallacy often, and that's what you'll see on Wikipedia. And essentially what Russell said is like, it is impossible to adduce any kind of evidence that there is not a teapot out there circling the globe just like the moon. And the reason for that is no matter how many observations you might be able to put together that we didn't see, there's no teapot. We looked here, here, every other spot, no evidence of any kind of teapot. Well, it could always just be maybe you just didn't look in the right place. Maybe you didn't look in the right way. You can never be fully comprehensive about that. There's always the possibility. Nevertheless, what the court in our case said was, look, unless you have affirmative evidence that there is no association here to conclusive proof, it can't be literally false. And therefore, this can't be the basis of a false advertising suit. It's, like I said, it was discouraging to get that kind of a ruling, disappointing, surprising, all these other things. But it's a discrete enough, fundamental enough mistake. And I do believe that there's no like, I'm sure some people hear things like that. And the fact that we're in the United States, when you sue somebody, you got to sue in their backyard. So like Hills is based in Kansas, and our lawsuit's taking place in Kansas. Our judge is from Kansas. To be clear, I have no confidence that there's some sort of backroom deal getting worked out here. But even though some people are inclined to think that kind of thing, I have no evidence of that. Is not something I believe. I believe that the court made a mistake about something that is so commonly the source of a mistake that it's got its own Wikipedia page that somebody like Russell had to explain it to the rest of the philosophical community. But it is like we're talking about it today. I'm a guy in a hoodie with no script, just articulate and doing my best to explain this to you. And we can kind of feel, I feel like I've been able to communicate some of it to you.
Definitely.
I believe that one way to address this could have been to ask the court to reconsider. That's a thing that can be done at trial level and say, look, court, we think you got something wrong. We're going to explain to you what it is. You should take another shot at this.
Got it.
Decided instead to do something different. We decided to appeal the court's decision to a higher level court. There's two ways that mistaken trial court rulings can get fixed. Either the court can fix it itself, or a higher court, a court with more authority, if you appeal to that court, can fix it and require the trial court to make a different decision. We decided to go that route. We immediately filed an appeal of the court's ruling granting the motion to dismiss the case and using all the logic that I just highlighted for you. And there are kind of a few different reasons for it. It's difficult for me, and I suppose most folks, to admit when you make a mistake. Like if you make a big public mistake, it's just difficult. And so there's some element of like, I think we're going to be more successful talking to a fresh set of eyes. But it's also the case that this is a higher court. This is a court with judges who there are only, there are 12 different federal appellate circuits, and it's one level below the Supreme Court. So there are very, very few in the United States judges that are going to do the kind of work that we're asking the court to do here. It's like you're getting very serious, more legit jurisprudence from this level of court. And it can potentially help to draw more attention to the mistake that the trial court made. And so for those reasons, rather than ask the court to reconsider, we filed an appeal to the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is in Denver, Colorado, and they'll get to hear and decide that appeal over whether the court was right in granting the motion to dismiss our TCM lawsuit. So the take home, where the rubber hits the road of all this is that unfortunately there's going to be a waiting period now. Me and the lawyers that are representing my company are going to have to go through the process of litigating this appeal. And that's going to take a period of somewhere between 6 and 12 more additional months before we have a final ruling that's going to be binding on the court below us. There's a chance that we won't be able to, I am rock solid, lead pipe lock, 100% confident that what I've articulated about the burden of scientific proof here and Russell's teapot, we're not wrong about that. We're right. Whether we
Yeah.
get the court to understand that, you can't call 100% certainty. I am confident on that.
Okay.
So that we'll have a period of time before we'll know exactly how the court will rule. There's it's important to note that false advertising cases grounded in false claims about science are growing more common in the, not just in the pet food world, but more broadly. Folks understand that consumers put a lot of faith in what science and studies show. And so,
As it
as
should.
they should, but I guess maybe the best, and that we're somewhat easier to mislead about what they really show. You could say false things about those studies and we'll trust the fact that you're saying it. And
Yeah.
so those kinds of false advertising suits have grown more common recently. And they represent, they're common enough that some parts of the country, courts in some areas of the country have developed like this whole body of law that governs them directly in the false advertising context. They're called establishment cases. Does the statement establish that studies do show this or not? And the whole argument that we made, because this is what our case is about as well, has to do with this like what's called the establishment doctrine. But it actually is just kind of like coming into place. And so it hasn't been adopted by the 10th Circuit. The area that's like ruling on our case hasn't been adopted yet. And so our hope is that our case will be the thing that gets the 10th Circuit to pick up the establishment doctrine and then apply that to the trial court. And it makes good law for that Hills will then be subject to going forward. So that's part of the expectations and goals for this stage of it as well. But in
Wow.
essence, we'll be fighting an appeal for the next 6 to 12 months.
Wow. So, I mean, in my understanding of I guess the core like philosophy of your work is you probably don't care too much, at least, or maybe not at all, about the money aspect, about the damage, the money owed to you in this lawsuit. You are more considered or more concerned with the bad science that's happening, and it's rampant in the pet food industry. And I think that we have many, many, many other cases that would highlight this bad science. But this particular issue with DCM and any sort of implication with any type of diet is so blatantly obvious to so many of us. And we are screaming it from the rooftops at this point. We are saying, please look at the information. Look, I mean, we'll link all of this, like Daniel mentioned before. We'll link the lawsuit. We'll link any pertinent articles that would help, gain perspective and understanding about this, of course. But there are, like you said, it's the Freedom of Information Act. Like there's nothing that you haven't touched in essence in this entire case. You had to do your homework quite literally to bring this lawsuit on. You've done that, and still right now, even after what the judge ruled on recently, you are still very firm in your opinion, your perspective, and what you know are facts in this case.
Yeah, like I won't sit here and say I am ironclad certain that we're going to win a false advertising lawsuit against Hill's Pet Nutrition. I think we ought to. It's the right results here. They did stuff that's bad, that's misleading, that caused damage to other folks, and they benefited from it. They
Yeah,
all. But like I said at the beginning, I'm adult enough to recognize that it's in a gray area enough. The type of advertising at play here is gray area enough that reasonable, serious people can in good faith disagree about that. And I
right,
can't say for certain that the specific judges and other decision makers that hear our case are definitely going to think that it is advertising. I think
right.
it ought to be. I'm confident in it, but I'm not ironclad, bet my life confident on it.
Yeah,
On the issue of falsity, I am ironclad, bet my life confident about it. And it's important that we get there with this case, regardless of whether, like you said, maybe you oversaid it a little bit. Like, I have been hurt by this. I do want to be repaid for the amount that I've been hurt unfairly. It's not fair. That company shouldn't get to make billions of dollars as a result of this. But my life's work is trying to improve this aspect of the companion animal nutritional science community. And so getting the court system to affirmatively bless and make very clear that there is no evidence of this association is definitely an important goal. We can lose the lawsuit and still make this a big teachable moment for people. So that
Oh,
is
I didn't know that. You're saying that the court might not rule that it's false advertising and emphasis on advertising, but they could still say that this is false information to claim that there's an association
absolutely.
between BEG diets and DCM. They can definitively say that, and what would happen in that case if they, throughout the advertisement?
Highlight it in statements that when you're trying to talk about this issue with folks who hear something from their vet, you can say, well, look, a federal court has ruled that what your vet is telling you is false. Here's how we know. Here's the specific text of that. Take a look at it. There's stuff that can be done at the FDA level. FDA, even though it's kind of like drawn a line under the DCM investigation at this point and has sort of said we found nothing there. You can ask them to take very explicit, specific statements, make those kind of statements after getting a ruling like that. And it's generally like an opportunity to help folks understand. It's like there are only this issue, I think about it in a like kind of academic context all the time, but like in this day and age, what what constitutes truth that what will people really look at and go like, okay, I am persuaded. I don't understand the substance of this, but what I do see here is enough to make me believe it's true. Can you get like I can't walk into a veterinary office, somebody who holds the belief that there is evidence suggesting an association between these two things, and there's just not like words I can say that
No,
persuade that person
no.
in a federal court saying as a matter of law, we've looked at everything from both sides and we will tell you as a matter of law, this is false. Does that have legs in a way that I don't? I would like to think it does. And
I,
so,
yeah.
you know, and so correcting the public's misunderstanding around this issue is definitely a goal of this. And so getting a ruling that regardless of whether it's advertising, it's definitely false, is valuable as far as I can see. It might not result in us getting money, but it's a valuable thing in correcting the record and for like fair outcome here.
Good. Well, that personally gives me hope. I know I'm speaking on behalf of hundreds of our stores that have been deeply affected by this, not just at, on a financial level, but also on, a bond and trust with our customers and with their pets. We do consider pets as family, and everything we do and say is surrounded by that. It's that's our goal. That's our main goal. And we always say our motto is you don't have to buy from us, but at least let us help you buy better. And that message at its core absolutely applies to what's going on here with the DCM. We're not trying to influence you to only buy a grain-free pet food from our store. We're not pushing the BEG diet on you. We're pushing what's best for your pet, even if we don't carry it. And that has never been any sort of influence on the wrong side of this science. We have always just looked at what are the facts, what is the evidence, and that's what's made this entire case so difficult for us to manage is there is no evidence. There is no evidence that any type of diet is associated with DCM. And yet that is exactly the opposite of what most veterinarians for our customers are saying. It was very misleading to see some of those early articles in 2018 come out, very blatantly making what looked like evidence-based claims. And to kind of dissect those articles that were published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, that's not something the average person's going to either have interest or time to do, or sometimes the ability, right? Like we can't assume that everyone has the ability to recognize an opinion piece versus an actual peer-reviewed scientific, research publication. That's not common knowledge.
Right.
And the fact that even the judge in the original court, dismiss on the claim that you can't prove that there is no association. The double negative there.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
so
You can't
frustrating.
prove a negative. Yeah, you can't find affirmative evidence that something doesn't exist. You can
Yeah.
only not have evidence of it.
So
Um,
I'll go home and just keep contemplating that how I could possibly disprove that there is an invisible tiny teapot that's too small for a microscope to detect. How will I disprove that that is not out in our
yeah, let me know. So let me, if I might, if can I say one more thing before, because I know we're running up on the end of our time together, but there's something else I just want to highlight that's a contextual thing that I think is really important for anyone that's made it this far in this episode. One of the reasons that like it's unfair to companies like mine, to companies like yours, and to plenty of different other interests that to like what's taking place here. But there's a big damage thing that's happening that we haven't talked much about that stems from this. There are real, deadly, serious, common, fixable health problems that dogs and cats do suffer in the United States, where there is evidence linking them to diet. By
Right.
talking about DCM, we are not talking about those real things. And it's a real, that's one of the worst things about this whole controversy
That's
is
so true.
pet food is not something that tends to be front page news.
No.
Alas, it ought to be in some places, but maybe not everybody has the same level of interest in it as you and I do. But we burned a lot of capital, media capital, talking about is this DCM thing real or not? And the whole time we're talking about that, what gets to not get talked about are the very real problems that are tied to big fundamental parts of the pet food ecosystem. And
That large percentages of our pets actively have right now today.
exactly,
Right
exactly.
now today. I mean, what do you remember off the top of your head what the actual percentage of cases of DCM in the United States were?
Yeah, it's somewhat disputed, but it's not, you are not talking about something that is
Significant.
no, I mean, look, what's significant, but like 50% of the dogs and cats in America have obesity, and
Right.
obesity is worse for them than a lifetime of smoking is for a person. Very serious disease. You know,
Totally.
in the when it cut, I think top of my head ish, 1% absolute max.
That's
1%
what yeah, that's my
have
understanding
some
as well.
form of cardiac disease like DCM. So
Yeah.
it's nowhere near as common. There are like and so anyway, I think
And look, it is a real disease and it is a very, very serious disease. And you and I have talked about that, candidly in the past as well. It is a very real concern. And when you bring it up the way that the media attached to this question, hypothesis, whatever it was, and you associate it, even falsely associate with any type of diet, you are going to, I was concerned. This is my job. This is my work. I am a pet nutritionist and I got so concerned to the point where I switched my healthy dog, and I'm not proud to say this, especially at this point. I switched my healthy dog off of a raw diet onto a grain inclusive kibble diet. I'm saying this to give the absolute most respect and empathy to our listeners. Um, it was that alarming. And the method in which they delivered that message was awful to me. And it deeply, deeply upsets me to this day that that rhetoric is still being pushed in the way that it is. Um, let's just be very honest. There is no evidence, right? Can we sum this up in the most correct legal terms possible? Daniel, can you do that for us?
terms, there's just never been a single study that's found that DCM is more common or worse symptomatically in dogs that eat BEG diets than dogs that eat non-BEG diets. There's never been any study. This is not me saying, well, there are studies, but they're all done by bad guys and they all don't count for one reason or another. There's literally never been one. There's been all sorts of papers published that have the word DCM or the acronym and the acronym BEG diet in them. And the folks who are defendants in our lawsuits will sort of wave their hands at those and go, see, look, there's a dozen papers involving this. These are all these papers that all involve, that clearly show something when it comes. None of them reach the very conclusion that they keep going around telling people. That's the heart of it. And it would be, if there really was something, it would not be rocket science to show. This is the kind of study, like associational studies are usually the beginning of scientific theories. These are one of the very first things. It's like all you have to do is take 500 cases of DCM and look at the commonality of BEG diets within the group and outside of the group. The fact that no one's even tried to do that work, let alone produce that kind of finding, is strong evidence that they don't actually believe that.
Interesting. Well, that's a really good point, that it's the foundation or start of building a theory on
Yeah,
something.
it's how causal theories get developed. You look at, wow, it looks like, see, you could imagine, we could talk about this for blue in the face, but like some scientist back in the 1930s, 40s says, seems like all of my all the patients that have come into the medical clinic recently that have lung cancer are smokers. Wonder if smoking is actually more common among people that get lung cancer or not. Let's carry out a study, see if they actually are more common than. Oh, it turns out that smokers get cancer at X% higher rates. That's what it means to have an association or correlation. Then
Right.
you can begin trying to understand, well, is it the smoking that's giving them cancer, or is it false correlation, is a correlation that isn't actually the cause? You go from there, you try to understand it at the molecular level. That very fundamental building block is not here. And so, yeah, it's maddening.
That's incredible. I mean, I want to first thank you for taking the time to explain this. I also want to thank you for all the work you've done,
Yep.
behind the scenes. I hope our listeners understand that there are good people out there trying to do what's right in especially, pet nutrition science, that sort of thing. It's daunting to say the least. I can't even imagine how many headaches you've gotten reading all the paperwork and, doing all the things, but we all appreciate on behalf of our listeners and our stores for sure. We absolutely are so appreciative of everything you've done with this. And we're really looking forward to more updates on the next level of the lawsuit, right? There's
You'll
still
get them.
hope and
And maybe at some point we'll even be done talking about this one and we can start talking about, get focused on the bigger fish that can be fried in the companion animal public health world, because there's certainly real, obvious, fixable things that people can do to keep their dogs or give their dogs a better likelihood of living a long, healthy life. But
wow, I would love nothing more than that.
yeah,
Thank you so much for your time today. And for
having
everyone,
me. Yep.
yes, absolutely. And for everyone listening, once again, we will have links provided to the lawsuit and then any other document that is helpful in understanding all of what we talked about today. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye-bye.